And
No, when they go anywhere and travel, first thing they do is get on a website and see what does a city have to offer. They're going to find the pool and check it out. And I have done that myself in my travels around the country. And by far and away, the swim center here at Palm Springs is the best. I agree completely with what Tom and Kathy have said about the various ways to increase the numbers, get more activity associated with the pool, get more awareness. It surprises me as a resident how many people really do not even know, number one, that there is a swim center, and number two, they don't even know where it is. So the sign that is on Ramon Road is probably a good start, but there seems to be more of a need to get the visibility and awareness out there to the pool. So in closing, I'll just make it real short that it's a great facility. A lot of the people that you talk to, you make some friends at the pool. There's a lot of concern that the pool might go away. So there's a lot of desire amongst the people to do what they can to see this thing sustain. So I encourage the commission to embrace ideas and try some of the things that are being brought forward. I think Tom has put a lot of thought into it. I completely support it. And I just emphasize we've got a great facility for Palm Springs. We certainly don't want to lose that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Do we have any other speakers? If not, then we will close our public comment, and I would like to thank you all for bringing some ideas to the table to enlighten us of things that we can look into for the community. Okay, our next portion of the meeting is our city manager's comments, and we happen to have our city manager with us today, and we also have Mayor Kors, and I'd like to invite them both up to the table as a joint and welcome them both to our meeting.
Thanks for having us.
Mr. Chairman, I yield to the mayor.
Thank you. I'm trying to, city manager.
I think you have questions for us, so do you want to start with that?
And if you all want to do any input first, or you want to go around?
Let's do the questions, and maybe that'll lead to...
We'll go with our same
Yeah.
standard format where everyone will get to ask their question and no one will be repeated until everyone's had an opportunity to speak to them so that we all get a chance. Who would like to ask the first question? Commissioner Lamar.
Is it true that there's any talk about closing the swim center?
I have not heard any talk about any cuts at the swim center, let alone closing it. That's,
Okay,
first I heard about that is today.
me too.
I do think more signage, and I liked a lot of the ideas about open houses. I think it would be great for more people to know about it. That's what it's there for. But the city just invested a bunch of money to improve it, and it's a crown jewel in the city. So, yeah, I haven't heard that before.
Great, thank
Yeah,
you.
Sure.
What can you tell us about Measure J and how we might get a little bit more excitement of their community finance money to do another community project to keep things going here with our parks?
Sure. So, and Councilmember Holstage is the Measure J liaison. And so one, either they need to be on your agenda. I think more importantly, if we can get Parks and Rec on their next agenda, can we get that set up? When there was a recommendation that the next 2 years of community projects, $1 million each, was for Parks and Rec, which the council liked, but we felt we should wait for the Measure J commission because that was the commission that was leaving and they were going 4 years out, and we'd have a new council. But I think everyone on the last council supported that, so we want to see that come forward and come to us, and I think the sooner the better. I think $2 million to invest in our parks right now would be a great use of that money. Probably not enough, but we have already talked about some other ideas to supplement that. But I do think it's a real high priority. It's so important for our residents and our youth. It's, other than a few things, it's free for everyone, and it's a great opportunity to move forward. So I would like to see that prioritized, and Measure J can weigh in. Then we'll come to council. But the sooner we do that, because everything else has already been allocated for Measure J, but the next 2 year community projects we should put on their agenda, if that works for the commission here.
Commissioner Diaz?
I'm just wondering,
What have you heard? What's the most recent word on the street for the downtown park? Have you heard anything new?
Sure. So they've already started work. They're scheduled to be done by November of next year. At the last council meeting, I asked, and the city manager agreed, we're going to do monthly updates so we can make sure we're really tracking it in a public way. I mean, staff tracks it, but I really want the public to know where we are on the downtown park to really keep that contractor on schedule. But they've ordered everything. They've started doing some work at the site. So it looks like it's moving at this point on schedule, but in January we'll have an update on where they are. But we really want to keep that moving and keep that schedule moving. It would be really nice if it opened in November next year before season. It's exactly when the tribe's planning to open the cultural center and spa. So given that's all right in the heart of downtown, it'd be great to see those open around the same time.
And
Unless you have
if I may,
anything-
and Mr. Chairman, I'd recommend actually, why don't we put on your monthly agenda an update on the downtown park? So we're updating council, and what should update you here too, so you can see in sort of real time, at least on a monthly basis, where we are, and you'd be apprised if there's any glitches. Okay?
Very good.
Thank you.
Also, in talking, Mayor Kors has been our liaison for the last year, and of course, the council will be dividing it up, but we are hoping that we have him back as our liaison to the council from Parks and Rec again for the next year. Commissioner Goodman?
Yes, thank you. Just a little historic background and then a question. It's 2 years ago, maybe 3, Parks and Recs made a presentation to Measure J with a request for community funds. A big part of that presentation was Sunrise Park, and looked at ideas or made suggestions on how we thought we could revitalize Sunrise Park to increase usage. And then shortly after that, when we knew that the Measure J Commission was going to switch commissioners, it was having a turnover, so we paused that. And then we organized a subcommittee or an ad hoc committee with 1 dog park and 2 pickleball, and we started to look at parks to see where we might either have an expansion or a possible redesign. And then I don't want to say that we were told directly, but we had understood that the library, as the library was looking to determine what their plans were, either expansion or relocation, that all things would be on hold for Sunrise Park. And then just recently, on Friday and now today, I've heard of something around a Sunrise Park master plan. So that is just all new information. So I'm kind of curious about the master plan, which actually is probably not a bad idea considering you have library, Parks and Recs would like to increase usage. And I've been on the commission for a number of years, and I've not heard from a Sunrise Park community or 1PS that there's now interest in Sunrise Park. So I love that there's more interest, but I'm feeling like I'm curious about what's in the back.
Start the process here. That's my assessment. Mayor, you may.
Sure. So there is no park subcommittee. We changed that to liaison. So,
Liaison.
you can bring that to me, and then we could put it on the next agenda here for a conversation with the Parks and Rec Commission. So I'm happy to take a look at it with you, and then we'll come here and have a conversation on whether that makes sense. But I don't think, to your first part, that we need to hold funding the community projects, right? If they allocate the funding and council approves it, it'll take a while till a plan's put together on how to spend it, right? I mean, conceptual ideas, but then it'll be a lot of more nitty-gritty work with staff and the commission on where we want to invest that money, right? We know there are some high priorities, bathrooms and some other things, but there's pickleball, there's potential, tennis courts, resurfacing, and maybe a couple extra at Ruth Hardy. There are a whole bunch of ideas for different parks, and that should really come through the commission. Measure J shouldn't dictate those. They should sort of pick the community projects and then work maybe, an ad hoc subcommittee of both or a subcommittee of both, which I can be part of and staff can be part of, to really then brainstorm what's the best use of the resources to improve our parks. But if we can put that on the next Parks and
Mm-hmm.
Rec Commission agenda, the idea of a master plan, that would be, I think, a great idea.
Commissioner Cohen.
Need your recommendation aside from Measure J funding, because nothing here actually comes to fruition without the dollars. Before we even had Measure J funding, the city would fund certain priorities, and Parks and Recreation was always one of that. And now it seems like we're always a step or two behind, or always a year lagging in when the discussions are happening at council level to set priorities for budgeting. Can you give us a recommendation on what that process ought to be practically, and when that timing ought to be, and what we should be looking at as far as city budget funding, that it's not Measure J money?
So, I mean, there are two parts. There's, right, program funding and there's infrastructure funding, right? So, in addition to Measure J infrastructure funding, and there's sort of a list that's ever changing with council direction, as we go through the 6-month budget review, we've already talked about this earlier today, at our January meeting, we're going to look at some potential funding out of some, we have surplus funding, which is always nice when we balance the budget after we reconcile it and there's extra money. Some of it needs to go in reserve, but some of it can be spent. So there'll be some discussion of how, what we do at that meeting. As far as program, that really comes through the budget. Unless you want to add anything
Well, and
else
what
to
I would
that.
recommend, I would just, and this might be helpful, I wouldn't get bogged down in the procedural part of the Measure J. What I would recommend, what I would ask of this commission, what I think would be most helpful for council is you recommend the capital projects that you need. And that's, we'd start that at the staff level in each department. Parks, for example. What is it that we need? That discussion is very ripe in this body. You kind of come up with a prioritized list. That's what we submit through the budget process. And this is what I would suggest to you, and I want to make your job easier. You shouldn't have to worry about it. You do the heavy lifting and figuring out what you think the priorities are that council should hear, but then you put the burden on us and council for the resources. So the Measure J process, the capital budget process, we should make it easier for you. So I think we get your priorities, and then we will deal on the budget process of how we're going to get you those resources, and then that ultimately would be a council policy decision. Now, that being said, Measure J does have a role, and they do have their recommendations. So I think it's good to have your liaison or subcommittee interacting, as the mayor mentioned, during the budget process with Measure J, so you don't feel like you're sort of a year behind.
But I would add on, on the community projects where there's 1 million set aside a year that Measure J makes recommendations on specifically, starting that now, since it was already recommended by the last Measure J commission, and seeing if that's what they're likely to spend, we should just do and have at their next meeting. As far as other resources, I like your idea. I think, if you had 2 million or if you had 4 million, what are those projects? Is some of it on the program side? Is all of it on infrastructure? What would those be? And then, as liaison, it's up to me to sort of see what I can advocate for. But I would come up with more than just your first 2 million, because Measure J council may decide, yeah, but we really wanted to do this, right? So, and in order is really good. It's sort of what staff does, right? They bring us their infrastructure list in order, and most of it we're good with, but we change it because we think differently than sometimes the staff recommendation. So having a master running list that we could work off, knowing every year it may change, would be really helpful.
If no one else has a hand up, we can go back to Commissioner Goodman. To the floor. No one else is asking, so for the floor.
So I just have a question. I heard that there was, that Parks and Rec staff submitted the capital improvements that were unfunded, which totaled about $34 million to Measure J. And I'm very clear that there's the $1 million that is community program or project, and then there's capital improvement and leasehold infrastructure and so forth. So giving council or staff the top 4 or 5 priorities, I mean, there's a huge priority for infrastructure, just huge. And that is not something that the community one, will always participate in, or get super excited where you can put that big sign up and say, funded by Measure J, and your city did this for you, and it's highly visible. If you ask Parks and Recs what the number one priority is, chances are everyone's going to say at this point it's restrooms. And, there's a portion of restrooms that has already been slated and budgeted, and everyone's going to feel really good about it. And there needs to be more. And then there's the community side that's screaming for pickleball courts and screaming for dog park. And I'm so excited to hear people are screaming for the pool, because we haven't really had community participation in that. So to me, those are community projects where that million, and we've already lost $1 million or $2 million to the downtown park. So I'm just sharing that as just some experience that I've had in my tenure on the Parks and Recs Commission, and it's all well and good the way it was said. It's just I do think there's something, it's very different, community project money and capital improvement money.
Yeah. But I think having the master list from Parks all work outable if we have sort of a master list. And I think downtown park will be a great thing, but, doesn't mean the next 2 years, $1 million each shouldn't go to Parks and Rec from Measure J, because that was a real priority for Measure J. And I think it's a priority for the city, at least for me.
Commissioners, having them here once a quarter was our agreement, so this is our chance, and I'll turn it over. I see Commissioner Armstrong has a comment, question.
Well, thank you both for coming. I'm trying to decide how to make my comment into a question. So,
It can be a comment.
okay.
For us anyway. That's okay.
One, I'm glad we're talking about Measure J, and Ellen have really been involved in this a lot, and I think once we pass Measure J, one of the surprises to me has been the Measure J Commission. I understand they serve both an advisory role and a watchdog role, but they do seem to act sometimes in their own world without talking to the commissions that are sort of the subject matter experts, right? And they come up with these proposals that may not be anything that's been through a commission process at all. And there seems to be in the last years ideas to correct that, and then it kind of falls apart. That's my impression. But I do want to talk about money for parks, because when people voted on Measure J, we all have our ideas what we were voting for, but parks was one of them that's important. And one of my disappointments with the city government to date with funding of the parks and the projects is that, sure, the downtown park is important to many people. I live in the north part of town, it's not really that important to me, but I feel like when we have a discussion about Measure J money in parks, it's been really skewed and a little not quite like forthright, because so much of that money that city officials say goes to parks has went to the downtown park. And so I would really like to see my elected leaders look at how much money actually has went in Measure J to city parks, not the downtown park, which is a huge percentage, and then look at those numbers to see if that's really the fair share over the last years that we've been getting all this tax money. Has a proper amount been going to city parks? We're going to talk about the dog park earlier, and I found, before I got here, something I wrote for the other side in 2014, one of those Valley Voices, and the stuff I'm talking about 6 years ago, same things now, to get out of that cycle with not just the dog park, but all sorts of park maintenance and improvement. And Measure J obviously isn't the only source, but it is a source, I think, that has not been enough of it given to parks because of the downtown park. So that's not a question, but that's sort of my
It sort of is, and can only share my view, obviously, in places with active parks. We can activate our parks a lot more than we do now. And so I really would like to see that happen. So it's something I'm committed to. And I think having the master list on both the program and infrastructure side will really help as we advocate through the budget process and through Measure J to do that. That said, it takes 3 votes to do anything, so I can only speak for me.
And what I would add, Mr. Chairman, is, it's for many, many years before Measure J, there was basically no capital improvement dollars. And the little that the city did, they were putting $1 million, $2 million into street resurfacing each year. And that's what you've seen, what's in your lap now, The fruits of that, the bad fruits of that, is all the infrastructure in the park that needs to be caught up, i.e. the restrooms is just one example. So at least, the Measure J issue is a good problem to have, at least. So I think we can refine that process so you have a better comfort level with it, interacting with Measure J. So the recommendations that get to council, both from your body and that body, maybe get to be a little more alignment. So because I sense that maybe you need to have a better comfort level with the process, and maybe we can help you with that. So I'll do my best. But in the meantime, I want to focus on, so for example, where's the restroom project? Where are we? So what I think I want to do, just because this really is important, I need to come Marcus Fuller and I, who's Assistant City Manager, is in charge of moving these projects along. I think for the next several months, we need to come back at each meeting and at least report out where we are. The downtown park, the restrooms, and the other ones, just so you have a comfort level that we're moving forward. So I will commit to that for sure, because I think it's important. And then also the update, well, you'll probably do that in your remarks on the grant applications that we have for, thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Dr. Reddy or Mayor Gorsuch? Commissioner Crawford?
Yeah, good evening. My question was about the restrooms as well. What is the status on the restrooms as far as new restrooms and then remodeling the old ones?
Yeah, so the process, what are the restrooms going to be? Now, they haven't approved the plans yet. I need to help you understand this process better so you have a comfort level that things are moving down the road.
And what would be helpful for me is, the last budget, we had funding to approve sort of the remodels and updates, but obviously on the bathroom report, there are a bunch of new bathrooms that are needed. So getting sort of the list that you had, at least most recently, on the next bunch of projects, including the new bathrooms that we need, even just to me and city manager, would be really helpful. So we have that when we have our budget discussion on the 9th. And we can sort of see if there's some things we could fund outside of Measure J as well, which is what I plan on looking at, which I talked to the city manager about already. So getting that ahead of time would be helpful.
And just a comment, I went to the Festival of Lights Parade, and I had to use the restroom at Francis Stevens. And we had to use the porta potty, actually. The restrooms that are right there in the theater were locked. So that's just one thing I wanted to point out.
That we should be able to fix easily, especially for events, but we should be able to lock those at night, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what's in the lease. They are locked in the evening. They're not open public restrooms, actually.
They're on their
No,
property.
yeah.
They're on their
They're-
lease.
yeah,
Directly
they're on
across the street, I understand from them that coffee is one of the facilities that is part of the city's.
We
Now-
might want to have a conversation for when we're doing major events downtown with them, because we need more than just the new ones downtown. I mean, we're limited.
Now those could turn into,
Pickleball